I read this in the newspaper. Oh, I'm David Woodall with the United Church of Canada, the Emsdale Pastoral Charge. I read in the newspaper this: everything we do is potentially fatal. The simple act of going to work incorporates a whole raft of risks, which to the most phobic of us would keep us locked indoors forever. We could get hit by a bus and die today, or we could simply die years from now from traffic-caused smog. And yet we still get up and leave the house every day. And that's because sitting on a couch all day and doing nothing more challenging than opening a can of pop involves its own set of unacceptable risks. In life, the only real danger lies in never taking risks in the first place. Crap happens in life. How do you put that in a nice way? I don't think you can. Terrible things can occur. A family walking down a street in London, Ontario, out of nowhere, they're deliberately run down by a pickup truck driven by some angry young man dealing with his own demons. 4 people dead on a lovely afternoon, and a young boy left to live life on his own. A student on a canoe trip in Algonquin Park drowns. His family, his teacher, his friends, all the lives lost and devastated by a single moment in time. Winter is approaching. We will sadly hear one more time about the unexpected avalanche that will sweep people away. A suicide bomber in a mosque in Afghanistan, and worshippers die in the place where they should feel most safe. Where does faith and hope go when the journey of life travels through the pain of our hearts? People might tell you that everything has a purpose. God has a plan for your life. Don't believe it. It's not true. What is true is that every life has a purpose and a meaning, but there is no puppet master manipulating the strings, manipulating the events of your life, or how you respond to them. Good can come out of bad situations, I know that. At least it can come out some of the time, but not all of the time. There's a reading from Jeremiah about the time that God called Jeremiah to be a prophet. And our passage tells us that God chose Jeremiah before he was born to be a prophet. But what always gets missed in these stories of being called by God is that the one being called chooses to respond. They might have chosen to not respond because God is not a puppet master. Jeremiah put it this way: the Lord said to me, I chose you before I gave you life, and before you were born I selected you. I said, but I'm only a boy. The Lord said, no, you're more than a boy. And then the Lord stretched out his hand and touched my lips and said to me, listen, I'm giving you the words that you must speak. And then Jeremiah chose to go and share them. He lived in a restless and uncertain time. The world order under the Assyrians for 200 years was crumbling. Egypt and Babylon both vied for control of Judah. The stuff that Jeremiah said made him very unpopular. He was considered a traitor by most of the people that he talked to. They subjected him to all sorts of indignities and suffering. He finally fled. Legend has it that he died in Egypt. Jeremiah was a good man who felt he had a purpose in life, and some awful things happened to him. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. A few centuries later, another good man who felt he had a purpose in life. Remember, I chose you before I gave you life, and before you were born I selected you? Well, this other man, Jesus, started everything off by walking to the front of his own temple and said to the people gathered there, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has chosen me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed and announce that the time has come when the Lord will save his people. Jesus was 30 years old before he decided that this was his journey in life. And they were powerful words he shared that day, because there were poor people in his hometown and there were captives in his hometown, and there were blind people in his hometown. And the wealthy of the community had used their wealth to set the rules of society in such a way that the poor and the needy could not hope to get ahead. Jesus was a good man, but he got chased out of town by his neighbors because of those words. That community anger was a prelude to some pretty terrible things that would happen later in Jesus' life. Sometimes crap happens. Things do not go smoothly. Even when you're a good person, there is randomness. Unexpected things happen. Plans get torn apart. Not everything has a purpose. I believe that each of us is looking for an approach to life and faith that is adequate for our times and for the good and the bad things of life that we will encounter. We want some approach to life that will get us through all the turmoil and disappointment that accompanies a life well lived. We know inherently that faith must be more than pious words, and life must be more than nice thoughts and bubbly experiences. We live in a real world that requires a tough realism. We're not after cute words and pretty songs. Life is gritty. Faith has a tough quality about it. Faith and living are action words. It's when life and faith are action that we find the strength to deal with all the bad things that will happen in life. Rabbi Harold Kushner, in his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, trashes the idea that tragedy and suffering happen in order to make us better people. He writes this: I would find it easier to believe that I experience tragedy and suffering in order to repair that which is faulty in my personality, if there were some clear connection between the fault and the punishment. A parent who disciplines a child for doing something wrong but never tells him what he's being punished for is hardly a model of responsible parenthood. And yet those who explain suffering as God's way of teaching us to change are at a loss to specify just what it is about us that we're supposed to change. Innocent people suffer. Things happen to them far worse than they deserve. They lose their jobs, they get sick, their children suffer, their homes are destroyed in a flood or an earthquake. They die in plane crashes or in explosions. If we leave our faith as being only cute words and pretty songs, then we will never have what it takes to make it through another day. Living in faith are action words, and any action requires both practice and reflection. They're not descriptive words, they are what you and I do. We practice living every day. We actually get up and help, not just watch. We actually share things with others, not just talk about it. We practice trusting others by taking risks that make us vulnerable. We practice trusting ourselves. We grow ourselves so that we are better people. We're not to sit at home and hope that the world somehow turns out right, that somehow people will love others, that somehow food is found for hungry people or clothing is found for those who are cold. We're not flowers on the wallpaper of life. If you want a life and a faith that will not disappoint you when you run into tough times, then practice as if your life depends on it, which it actually does. Practice faith and living when it's easy, and practice when it's hard, and practice when you're feeling spiritual, and practice when you have no idea what the hell you're doing or even why. Nobody knows how life is going to unfold. It might be good or it might be bad, but the promise that God gives us is that in the darkest night, when we are most alone, when all hope seems to be gone, when loved ones die, when dreams fail, we are still not alone. Deep inside of us lies that divine spark, created in us before we were born. There will be valleys of shadows, but we will not live there. If you want a faith for real life, then practice it, when it's easy and when it's hard. The Lord said to you and to me, I chose you before I gave you life, and then I reached out and touched you. God bless you, everyone. Amen.